On September 13, 2015, at 5:40 p.m., 3 members of the Hartwell family walked into Olympic National Park in Washington and vanished. Lauren and Marcus Hartwell and their 22-year-old daughter Rachel told relatives they would be home by Monday morning. They never checked out of the park. Their SUV stayed in the same gravel lot. Keys gone, doors locked. Phones went dark near the Hoh Rain Forest. In the hours after they missed a scheduled call, their family started to panic. For years later, a strange biological anomaly deep in the same park would force investigators to ask a new question. What really happened to the Hartwells that Sunday evening? This case begins like many weekend trips in the Pacific Northwest. A clear forecast, a marked trail, a 3-day loop planned around well-known campsites. Lauren and Marcus were experienced hikers. Rachel grew up on these trails. Friends and co-workers later told detectives the same thing. If any family knew how to move through the woods safely, it was the Hartwells. By 7:30 p.m. that night, relatives in Portland and Seattle were already checking their phones. A text from Lauren was overdue by more than an hour. At 9 p.m., it still had not arrived. Evelyn Morales, Lauren's mother, tried calling each of them in turn. Every call went straight to voicemail. She waited through the night, hoping for a simple explanation. None came. Before noon on Monday, September 14th, Evelyn reported all 3 missing. Park rangers found the family's vehicle exactly where it should have been, at a small trailhead on the park's western edge. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no dropped gear. It looked like a routine day hike that simply had not ended. Officially, the search for the Hartwells would stretch on for weeks. Unofficially, the mystery started in those first silent hours, with a locked SUV, 3 missing adults, and no clear direction of travel. By the next morning, there were no usable tracks or fresh impressions around the vehicle. In 2019, one abnormal patch of ground would break that silence. Lauren Hartwell was 34 years old in September 2015. She worked as a freelance UX designer in Seattle. She split her time between client calls and hikes along the Cascades. Her husband was 36-year-old Marcus Hartwell. He consulted on environmental impact projects. He had logged hundreds of miles on backcountry trails across Washington and Oregon. Their only child, 22-year-old Rachel, was a communications major at a local university. She was an amateur photographer who filled her social media with trail photos. She also posted short clips from national parks. Friends described the Hartwells as careful planners. Marcus kept spreadsheets of gear lists and mileage estimates. Lauren checked weather forecasts down to the hour. Rachel usually mapped cell coverage areas before trips, so she knew where she could upload photos. When investigators later pulled their devices, they found chat threads about preparation. The family argued over small details, like how many water filters to pack. They also debated which trailhead had safer parking. In one exchange a week before the trip, Marcus reminded both of them that complacency is what gets people killed out there. Their home life looked stable on paper. There were no recent police calls to the house. There were no restraining orders or financial lawsuits. Bank records showed steady income and routine spending. Travel history showed repeated trips to public lands, always on marked routes. They registered at ranger stations when required and emailed itineraries to relatives. On earlier trips, they had come home with nothing worse than blisters and memory cards full of images. The closest person outside the immediate family was Lauren's mother, 62-year-old Evelyn Morales in Portland, Oregon. She had grown used to the family's travel routine. Before every multi-day hike, Lauren called her with the exact route, planned campsites, and estimated check-in times. Evelyn wrote the details on a yellow legal pad she kept by the kitchen phone. That pad would later become one of the first pieces of evidence handed to detectives. Rachel treated those calls as a joke at first. On her social media, a caption under one mountain photo read, "Proof for Mom, I did not vanish in the woods." If you want to follow how that caption turned into an open case file, you can subscribe and stay with this story. After September 2015, that sentence would be read again in a very different light. On Saturday, September 12, 2015, the Hartwells drove from Seattle to the Olympic Peninsula. Surveillance cameras at a gas station in Forks recorded them at 3:07 p.m. They bought fuel, trail snacks, and a canister of bear spray. Rachel appeared in the footage holding a laminated park map and laughing at something on her phone. Nothing in that video suggested tension or fear. Phone records show a text from Marcus to a coworker at 4:22 p.m. He wrote that they were starting their 3-day loop early the next morning. He attached a photo of a clear sky over the western edge of the park. At 6:15 p.m., Lauren sent Evelyn a brief message. It said they had checked into a small motel and would begin hiking at sunrise. That was the last confirmed contact. On the morning of Sunday, September 13th, the family's silver SUV appeared briefly on a highway camera heading toward a lesser-used trailhead. No cameras covered the final forest road. A handwritten entry in a voluntary logbook at a nearby ranger station reads, "Hartwell, party of 3, 3-day loop." The handwriting matches Lauren's signature on bank documents. They did not file a formal backcountry permit because the route stayed on established trails. Evelyn expected a short text from Lauren by 8 p.m. Sunday. When none arrived, she stayed up watching the time. By 10:30 p.m., all 3 phones went straight to voicemail. She assumed a coverage issue and tried again at 6 a.m. Monday. The result was the same. At 11:18 a.m. on September 14th, she called the Clallam County Sheriff's Office and reported all 3 missing. Park rangers located the SUV within 2 hours. It sat in a gravel pull-out, often narrow access road. The doors were locked. Inside, they found a cooler with food for the drive home, an empty bike rack, and a folded park brochure. The detail that bothered investigators most was on the dashboard. The laminated map Rachel carried in Forks lay open with a section lightly circled in blue ink. The circled area did not match the loop route Lauren had written on her mother's legal pad. That quiet pencil circle on paper was the first sign the Hartwells' final plan might not match their final path. Rangers began the ground search on the afternoon of September 14, 2015. They walked every marked segment leading away from the trailhead and found nothing. No dropped water bottle, no torn fabric, no impressions consistent with 3 adults. A K-9 unit was brought in before sunset. The dog picked up a faint trace leading toward a junction in the trail system, then lost it 20 yards in. That loss of scent suggested the family either changed direction abruptly or left the marked path entirely. Neither option matched the plan written on Evelyn Morales' legal pad. Investigators turned to the last confirmed image of the Hartwells. A hiker from Idaho emailed a photograph to park officials after seeing a public request for information. The picture showed Lauren, Marcus, and Rachel standing on a ridge at 9:24 a.m. on September 13th. The Idaho hiker said they asked him to take the photo and then continued north along the main trail. He noticed nothing odd, except that Rachel paused to check her phone even though most of the ridge had poor coverage. That detail caught investigators' attention. Her phone had no recorded service at that time, yet she appeared to be reacting to something on the screen. Detectives were also struck by the fact that the Idaho hiker reported seeing no one else on the trail for nearly an hour before meeting the Hartwells. That stretch was usually busy on weekends. When search teams canvassed the area, they confirmed the ridge had unusually light foot traffic that morning. A ranger suggested a simple explanation. Heavy fog earlier in the day had pushed hikers to other routes. But investigators filed the note anyway, because light traffic meant fewer potential witnesses. By day 4 of the search, federal teams joined the operation. Helicopters scanned clearings and riverbanks. Drones mapped the canopy. Nothing surfaced. Even more troubling, there were no emergency pings from any device owned by the Hartwells. Their phones and Rachel's smartwatch stayed silent after 10:31 a.m. on the day they disappeared. On September 20th, officials briefed the family. They said the evidence indicated the Hartwells likely walked beyond the mapped loop, either by mistake or by choice. The phrase, "or by choice," lingered with Evelyn, who insisted her daughter would not alter a route without warning. What investigators could not explain was why one circled section on Rachel's map pointed to a spur trail not listed in the family's plan. In July 2019, almost 4 years after the Hartwells vanished, a different team walked into Olympic National Park with a very different mission. Dr. Noah Finch, a 38-year-old mycology lecturer at the University of Washington, was leading a small research group. Their permit allowed them into a remote study area far from any tourist trail. The project focused on how fungi recolonize ground disturbed by old logging roads and small burn scars. None of them were thinking about missing hikers that afternoon. On July 21st, at around 2:10 p.m., the team stopped to rest near a massive spruce in a shallow basin. Graduate student Kim Alvarez was the first to notice something odd at the base of the tree. A lumpy patch of growth spread across nearly 3 feet of soil, pressed up against the roots. At first glance, it looked like an overgrown slime mold. When they moved closer, the color was wrong. Parts of it were sulfur yellow, other sections a stark white, streaked with patches of dull black. The surface looked porous and wet, as if someone had poured foam and let it harden. Noah documented what he saw in his field notebook. He noted the size, the shape, and the exact coordinates. The smell was what made him pause. The forest floor usually carried the scent of wet earth and plant decay. This was sharper and heavier. It suggested active decomposition concentrated in one place. The team stayed several minutes, taking high-resolution photos from multiple angles. They did not disturb the soil. By 3 p.m., they had moved on to their next sampling grid. That evening, at a small field station outside the park boundary, Noah transferred the images to his laptop. A seasonal ecologist with the National Park Service happened to be in the lab. When he saw the sequence of photographs, he asked how large the growth was in person. Noah told him it was roughly the size of a large animal curled up. The ecologist suggested a common explanation. Sometimes, he said, the body of a buried elk or black bear can feed an extreme fungal bloom. It sounded like an opportunity for extra data. The Hartwell case was not on anyone's mind when Noah and his students agreed to hike back in the next morning with shovels and sampling tools. On July 22, 2019, Noah Finch and his team hiked back to the Spruce Basin with shovels, core samplers, and sample bags. They reached the site just after 11 a.m. The abnormal growth looked unchanged. It still covered a wide oval of soil at the base of the roots. The smell was stronger in the midday heat. One student later told investigators it felt like walking into an invisible wall. Noah decided they would start at the edge. He did not want to cut into anything they did not understand. Kim Alvarez dug a narrow trench along one side using a compact shovel. The soil came up looser than expected, as if it had been disturbed before and then packed down again. After less than a foot of digging, the odor intensified sharply. The group began working in short shifts, stepping back every few minutes just to breathe clean air. At about 18 inches down, Kim's shovel met resistance. It did not sound like rock. It did not feel like wood. It gave slightly under pressure. Noah knelt down and brushed soil away by hand. His fingers hit a smooth surface. It was not bone. A dull black sheet emerged, creased and folded. He recognized industrial plastic. Someone had buried a large object here and wrapped it carefully. That changed the tone of the day. The team stopped treating the site as a research find. Noah told everyone to move back. He used a knife to expose a small section of the plastic, just enough to confirm it was a heavy tarp, not trash. When he pierced the outer layer, a thicker wave of decomposition odor pushed out of the opening. Inside, in the beam of his headlamp, he saw darkened material that was clearly organic. Noah backed away and pulled a satellite phone from his pack. At 11:42 a.m., he called Park Dispatch and reported what he believed to be a clandestine grave. Rangers and county deputies needed several hours to reach the basin. They arrived to find the tarp exposed in a neat rectangle, the fungal mass documented but intact. The students were sitting on their packs, silent, waiting to be interviewed. None of them yet knew that the body inside that tarp would finally put a name and a face back into the Hartwell file. The body recovered from the Spruce Basin was transported to the Clallam County Medical Examiner's office that same evening. The remains were wrapped in several layers of thick black tarp, secured with heavy tape. When the wrapping was opened in a controlled room, examiners found a mostly skeletonized adult male with limited soft tissue preserved. Initial measurements and dental features suggested a man in his mid-30s, consistent with Marcus Hartwell's records. The first autopsy focus was trauma. Examiners looked for bullet holes, sharp force injuries, or fractures from blunt force. They found none. The skull was intact. The ribs and long bones showed no sign of perimortem breaks. The hyoid bone in the neck region was unbroken, which argued against strangulation. There were no obvious indicators of dismemberment or post-mortem cutting. On paper, the body showed no classic signs of homicide, yet had been hidden like a homicide victim. The pathologist noted one physical clue. Several bones around the right lower leg showed subtle changes. They were not broken, but there was pitting and discoloration in a tight pattern. It could not be linked to a specific injury without soft tissue. Toxicology was ordered on every available sample. That meant scraping bone marrow, collecting soil and fluid trapped in the folds of the tarp, and swabbing the inner plastic surface. Those tests took weeks. When results came back from a specialized lab, they changed the direction of the case. Analysts detected high concentrations of venom components consistent with a western rattlesnake species. The levels indicated a severe envenomation, not a minor strike. A bite like that, untreated, can be fatal within hours. That finding was documented in a technical report and summarized in a short line on the amended autopsy. Probable cause of death, complications of rattlesnake envenomation. Herpetology experts were consulted. They told detectives that rattlesnakes do exist on the drier eastern slopes and in certain clearings on the peninsula. They are rare, however, in the cool, dense forest where Marcus's body had been buried. Internal memos obtained later by reporters show the same question written in the margins of one report. If Marcus died from a snakebite, why did someone go to such trouble to wrap and hide him under a tree miles from any marked trail? For investigators, the rattlesnake finding solved one problem and opened another. It explained how Marcus Hartwell might have died. It did not explain why his body was wrapped and buried like evidence. If this had been a wilderness accident, someone chose to treat it like a crime scene. They went back to the one object that did not belong in a national park: the tarp. It was not a cheap camping sheet. Laboratory analysis showed a thick, UV-resistant plastic used in agriculture and construction. The weave pattern and chemical composition narrowed it further. It matched heavy-duty covers sold through a limited number of rural suppliers in western Washington. Trace analysis of the tarp's outer surface added more detail. Technicians found microscopic particles of volcanic soil pressed into the plastic. That soil type did not match the spruce basin. It matched certain upland zones and old homestead clearings outside the park. There was also residue from aged diesel fuel soaked into some folds. It suggested the tarp had been in contact with machinery, storage tanks, or both. Investigators built a new working model. Marcus is bitten by a rattlesnake somewhere drier, closer to the park's edge. He dies before he can reach help. A second person, with access to a vehicle, a shovel, and industrial tarp, moves the body. That person drives or drags him into a remote basin, buries him, and leaves without reporting anything. In that model, Lauren and Rachel either never reach the scene, or they do and something worse happens. The model raised hard questions. If this second person was trying to hide a murder, why use a method that preserved so much evidence? If they were only afraid of being blamed for a snakebite death, why not leave Marcus where he fell and disappear? Geologists were asked to map all known volcanic soil pockets within driving distance of the park. At the same time, detectives compiled a list of farms, logging outfits, and isolated properties that bought or stored that specific class of tarp. They were looking for a place where heavy machinery, diesel tanks, and volcanic soil overlapped on one piece of land. Somewhere in that overlap, someone knew more about the Hartwell's last hours than they had ever told police. The overlap investigators were looking for did not stay theoretical for long. By late 2019, the geological maps, tarp supplier records, and property tax data had produced a short list. It contained fewer than 20 properties within a practical driving radius of Olympic National Park. Each one sat in or near volcanic soil zones, showed evidence of diesel storage, and had a history of buying heavy-duty agricultural tarp. Many were old farms or partial homesteads far off paved roads. Detectives and federal agents began visiting those locations under neutral pretexts. They used fire safety checks, reports of illegal dumping, or vegetation surveys as cover. Most owners were cooperative. Some were annoyed but let officers walk the grounds. Soil samples were collected discreetly from driveways and equipment areas. None of those early visits produced a match strong enough to justify a warrant tied to the Hartwell case. That changed when they drove up a narrow, rutted track to a spread registered to a 59-year-old man named Silas Grady. Grady's property sat 8 miles by air from the Spruce Basin where Marcus was found. The only access was a former logging road badly washed out in places. When two detectives arrived there in an unmarked truck, they found a scatter of older buildings around a main cabin. Rusting equipment and vehicle shells filled the clearing. Near a small shed sat a cylindrical diesel tank on a concrete pad, stained from years of overflow. Draped over the hood of a non-running tractor was a sheet of black tarp with a weave and thickness that looked unsettlingly familiar. Their stated purpose that day was fire risk assessment. Grady answered the door in worn work clothes. According to reports, he was immediately defensive about government officials on his land. One detective kept him talking on the porch while the other noted details in the yard. Leaning against the shed were multiple rolls of the same type of tarp seen on the tractor. When the detective later compared photographs from the yard to close-up images of the tarp from Marcus's grave, the similarities were exact down to manufacturing marks. On paper, the Hartwell investigation finally had more than a theory. It had a property, an owner, and a reason to go back with a warrant. On January 9, 2020, before dawn, deputies and federal agents drove back up the washed-out logging road to Silas Grady's land. A signed search warrant allowed them to enter every structure and outbuilding. Because of the isolation of the property and Grady's history of hostile encounters with officials, a tactical team went in first. They reached the clearing at 6:12 a.m. and took positions around the main cabin and sheds. Grady opened the door after the third knock. He was taken into custody without incident, handcuffed on the front porch under the terms of the warrant. While one deputy stayed with him, others began a methodical search. Outside, forensic technicians photographed the rolls of tarp, the diesel tank, and samples of the distinctive reddish soil. Inside, the cabin looked like a typical single-man space. There were piles of tools, canned food, and old magazines. What investigators did not see were any clear signs that women had lived there recently. They did not find anything directly tied to the Hartwells in the first hours. No wallets, no phones, no clothing. Dogs brought to the scene alerted lightly near the back of the cabin, but could not pinpoint a source. It was only when a detective moved a worn rug near the kitchen that something changed. Floorboards in one corner sat slightly higher than the others. The seams between them were irregular, as if they had been removed and replaced. When the boards were pulled, they exposed a square opening with a short ladder leading down. The air rising from the space was cold and damp. A flashlight beam showed dirt walls and wooden shelves. It was a small root cellar dug directly under the cabin. In the far corner, the packed earth looked disturbed. Forensic personnel carefully scraped away layers of soil. A few inches down, a fragment of fabric appeared, then bone. The body recovered from that corner was dressed in clothing that matched what Lauren Hartwell had been last seen wearing. Later dental comparison confirmed her identity. Near the shelves, investigators found a small backpack containing Rachel's student ID, a compact camera with the memory card missing, and a spiral notebook with her handwriting on the first pages. The seller had given them proof that both women had reached Silas Grady's property. It had not yet answered who, if anyone, had ever walked back out. Once the cellar and the basin were processed, the case against Silas Grady moved fast. He was booked into the Clallam County Jail on January 9, 2020, for investigation of murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. In his first interview, he denied knowing anything about the Hartwells. He claimed the body under his cabin must have been there before he bought the property. Records showed he had owned the land since the late 1990s. That lie went into the file as his starting point. Over the next 48 hours, detectives confronted him with the physical evidence. They showed him photos of the tarp from Marcus's grave and the matching rolls by his shed. They laid out lab reports on the volcanic soil and diesel residue. They presented the autopsy findings on Lauren, which documented a fractured hyoid bone consistent with strangulation. Finally, they put Rachel's student ID and notebook on the table. Grady stared at the items for a long time and said nothing. It took several sessions, but the pressure worked. Grady eventually asked to speak without his earlier denials on the record. In a recorded statement, he laid out a version of events from September 2015. He said Lauren and Rachel reached his cabin after dark, confused and exhausted. Marcus, according to him, had been bitten by a rattlesnake hours earlier on a dry spur off the main trail. By the time Lauren found Grady's property, she believed her husband was already dead. She asked for help and a phone. Grady admitted he had a working satellite phone in the cabin but chose not to use it. He told detectives he walked back with Lauren and Rachel, confirmed Marcus had no pulse, and then changed his plan. He said he realized no one knew the women were at his property. He admitted to forcing them back to the cabin at gunpoint. What followed in his account was a sequence of captivity, assault, and a calculated decision to kill Lauren in the cellar and hide her under the floor. He described wrapping Marcus in tarp and burying him near the spruce basin the next day. On Rachel, his story shifted. He insisted he did not kill her, claiming instead that he drove her south 2 days later and left her at a bus station with cash and a warning to stay quiet. Phone records and fuel receipts showed he did make a sudden round trip out of state after the estimated time of Lauren's death, but no surveillance footage has ever clearly confirmed Rachel stepping off his truck alive. By the spring of 2021, the legal case against Silas Grady was ready. Prosecutors in Clallam County charged him with first-degree murder for the killing of Lauren Hartwell, first-degree kidnapping and sexual assault related to both Lauren and Rachel, and unlawful disposal of human remains for the burial of Marcus under the Spruce Basin. Because Washington no longer used the death penalty, the maximum practical sentence was life in prison without parole. Grady's own recorded statement created a strange split in the file. He admitted to holding Lauren and Rachel at gunpoint. He admitted to killing Lauren in the root cellar and hiding her under his cabin. He admitted to wrapping Marcus in tarp and burying him miles away. He did not accept responsibility for Marcus's snakebite death, and he insisted that Rachel had walked away from him alive. Investigators believed he was minimizing his actions, but they also knew there was no physical proof of what happened to Rachel after she left the property, if she left at all. Forensic work on the cellar supported the murder charge. Soil samples around Lauren's remains matched the same time frame as Marcus's burial. Marks on the cellar walls and on remnants of rope suggested restraint. The hyoid fracture and other neck findings were consistent with manual strangulation. Evidence technicians documented every item in the small room, then removed the ladder and sealed the opening under court order. The cabin itself became part of the case record. Facing that stack of evidence, Grady agreed to a plea deal in late 2021. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Lauren, to kidnapping and assault charges tied to both women, and to unlawful handling of Marcus's body. In exchange, prosecutors did not pursue additional aggravating factors that would have triggered a longer contested trial. At sentencing, the judge imposed life without the possibility of parole. In court, Evelyn Morales read a statement describing her daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter, and asked one question the plea could not answer. Where's Rachel? Officially, the Hartwell file is listed as cleared by arrest for Lauren and for the handling of Marcus's remains. Rachel remains classified as a missing and endangered adult whose last known contact was with a man now serving life in a state prison. Somewhere between a remote cabin, a snake-bitten spur trail, and an unconfirmed bus station, the final hours of her story are still missing.